All right, so we're going to continue from where we stopped last time. We started with this our selectors, which is a basic selector there. And we are able to talk about the elements. We're able to talk about the class, and at the same time, we talked about the ID universal, and these are child selector. So these are different selector that you are going to be using there, because when you want to style your element and you have your CSS separated from the HTML, you need a way to talk to the CSS to locate your element and apply the necessary style that you want on that element. And I told you are going to be using the CSS rule set, and the rule set is a combination of selector and the declaration, which are the properties that you want to change on the element. And we're able to talk about the different types that we have there, or different methods that you can use to target your element. And I gave you an assignment, but what you did here is not what it's supposed to be there. So when you're talking about the assignment that I talked about, what I'm seeing, let me check again, the one that was sent to me. Yeah. So you just put class selector, you just put ID. I'm not saying you should type out the English word. What I ask you to do is to type the correct CSS selector based on the English that we have here. So not that you are supposed to be putting English back to me the way you did it there. So for example here now, look at this first question, which says select all the H1 on the screen. What this one is asking for you is to do the selector that is going to represent the English that we have here. And based on what we have been doing before, as you can see, this is the solution here. So to select an element, or to select H1 element on the screen, is just by you using H1 and you closing or you open this curly brace. What you are doing is the rule set. But right now we are only focusing on the selector part, and that's the reason you see that nothing is inside the curly brace, because the only part we are focusing on is the selector part. Don't forget, rule set is a combination of a selector and along with the declarations that you want to apply on it. But right now we are only focusing on this part. So that's the reason why your assignment have to be in this way. So when you want to solve the assignment, you put the correct selector, then after that you put the curly brace that you have beside it there. Nothing will be inside, because we are not talking about declaration right now. And this is the solution for this first question here, which says select all the H1 elements. So we are using element selector because it says you should select all the H1 elements on the screen. It's not telling you to use the class selector. It's not telling you to use the other type of selector that you are going to see later on there like that, but it's telling you to select all the H1 elements on the screen. So here too, for the second question, this one is telling you to select all the elements with class H. So now this one is saying that you have to select the element based on class. And which class are you using to select the element? As you can see here, you are using class H. But how do you select an element based on class? Don't forget, you start with the dot, then followed by the name of the class that you want to use, which is going to be this age here. And this is what we need, or this is what you're supposed to do for that second question. So for the third one, this one too still follow the same pattern there. So select all the elements with ID heading. Again too, we've talked about how you can select an element based on ID. So we've talked about how you can select an element based on ID. And how do you select any element based on ID? You start with the hash symbol, then followed by whatever the ID of the element that you want to select. But what is it asking us to select now? It's asking us to select the ID heading. So which means here we're going to have hash, then followed by the name of the ID that we want to style. So this one is telling you to select all the H1 element. They did not mention anything like you using the element. We want to select it based on ID. And that's the reason why this one here, it's having hash, but this one, it wants to select the element based on class. And you know, to select based on class, you are going to start with the dot symbol there like that. Again, for this other one, which is a noun, we are selecting all the H1 that is inside form. So this one too, we've talked about it, which is the child selector. So the child selector allows you to select one element that is inside another element. And as you can see on this page here now, we have li inside ol. And at the same time, we have li inside ul. So which one do you want to select? Do you want to pick the one that is inside ul, or you want to pick the one that is inside ol? Again, down here, you can have different elements inside each other, like h1 that we have inside the div, or like this p that we have inside the div. So what if I want to select only the p that is inside the div, not the one that is outside of it? We can use the child selector to select one element that is inside another element. And last time I told you that when you want to select any element that is inside another element, it follows this pattern, where you are going to have the parent selector, because you are selecting one element that is inside another one. So the one that is hosting the element is what we call the parent. So here now the div is the parent of this h1. This div too is still the parent of this p. But this h1 and p here, they are siblings because they are side by side. They are not inside each other. So in CSS, when your element is side by side, we call those elements sibling. But once your element is inside another element, the one that is wrapping the element is what we call the parent, while the one that is inside is what we call the child. So anytime I mention parent, I'm talking about the one that actually wrapped the element. And when I'm talking about the child, I'm talking about the one that is inside that parent. So this h1 and this p here, they are children to this div. The same thing too, that div is children to body because everything is inside body. And this body too is children to HTML because it is inside HTML. Once we put one element inside another one, the one that is inside is known as the child, while the one that is wrapping the child is what we call the parent. So here now, so in order for you to be able to select one element that is inside another element, you need to have the selector for the parent. Then after that, you have to have the child selector. And this is what we call child selector here. Why are we calling it child selector? The reason why we're calling it that is because we want to select this child, but not just any of this child. It must be inside the parent that you put here. So whatever you are using as a parent selector, that child, once we find it inside that parent selector, then we are going to style the child that we have here. The only thing we want to style is the child, but the child must be inside whatever you are using to select the parent. Just like the way this one is saying, and it's telling us to select h1 that is inside form. So from here now, the parent is form, while the child is h1. So when you want to create the selector now, you know which one to place by the left side and you know which one to place by the right hand side based on the one that is child and the one that is parent. So I told you any element that is inside another element is the child, while the one that is wrapping that element is what we call parent. And based on that now, from this question, as you can see, select all the h1 inside. So which means h1 is inside another element, and that means the h1 is child to that particular element. So when you want to arrange the selector now, what we are going to have is form, because that is the parent, and that's the selector for the parent, because they are saying you should just select the one that is inside form. We are not being told to select based on class or select based on ID. So we are going with the element selector. And what do we want to select inside it? You want to select h1. So we need to create the selector for this h1 too. And here too, there's nothing like class, there's nothing like ID. So we are going to be using the element selector. So here I'm going to be using this h1. And this is what you are supposed to do for this one. So we are looking for the h1 that we can find inside form. It's only that h1 that is going to be styled on the screen. If the h1 is not inside form, it will not style it. It will forget about it. But if it is inside the form, that's when it's going to apply whatever declaration you want to apply later on. So this is how you can select one element that is inside another element. And it doesn't stop on 2. It can be multiple elements that are inside each other. For example, here now on the page, as you can see, I have this H1 that is inside form. So once I apply the CSS there with that selector, this is the H1 is going to style. But it will not touch the H1 that we have here, because this H1 now is not inside form. It will only focus on the one that is inside the form. And it doesn't stop at 2 like this. You can actually have multiple selectors that are more than that as a parent selector there. So let me comment out all this one so that I can display that one. I don't want this error to be coming out. So this is how to do the stuff, but it doesn't stop here, because you can have multiple parents. So you can have parent 1, parent 2, parent 3, and so forth like that. Then you have the child. The child is always the one by the right hand side of the curly brace. So whatever the last selector you have before the curly brace, that's the child. But everything on the left of it, they are referred to as the parent. And as you can see from here, what this means is that we want to style this child, but this child, we want to style this child. Yeah, my network just disappeared a little bit. Can you hear me again?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so what this one is saying here is that we want to select this child, but the only time we are going to pick it is when this child is inside. Hello? Hello? Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
I don't know, this network is just...
Yes, I can hear you.
Alright, so what this means here is that we want to select this child if and only if that child is inside this parent 3 selector, and this parent 3 selector 2 is inside parent 2 selector, and parent 2 selector is inside parent 1 selector. What does this thing mean? For example, here now, let me go to this page. So we can have something like this on our page, where I have a div like this. Then inside the div, I have the P. Then inside the P, I have the span. So we can target a span that is inside P. So this is span. So we can target this span that is inside P, and P that is now inside the div. So what we want to target is just the span. What we want to target is the span. But the span must be inside P, and P2 must be inside div. So if you can find something like that, then we want to change the color of the span to blue or anything. So here we have a div, we have P, and we have span. The only thing you want to select here is the span. But the span must be inside P, and P must be inside div. And once we find this thing on this page, then the color of the span is going to be red. And once I save this thing, save the 2 code, and go back to the page, we should have the color of the span to be red. But if there is any other span on the page and they are not following this pattern, you are not going to see the color at all. For example, here now, let me put another span here, and I'm going to say that I'm going to put it as span outside. So since this one is outside, it's not following that selector. And once we get to the page, you see that we are not going to have the style on it once this thing is saved and it's get to the page. So it's still saving. And once we get to the page, then we should have the span outside. What's wrong with this? VS Code. Let me load it again. Okay, I have this. Oh, I have it in another place. So look at it. Can you see the span here? So the span outside. You can see the color is not there. But the one that is here, we have the color red. Why is it giving this one color red and it's not giving this one color red? It's because of the rules that we are applying here. We only want to style the span if it is inside P tag. And again, this P tag is inside the div. That's the only time it will style it. But if I remove all this other selector and I just save it, you see that the two of them now having color red, because this one will pick all of them. Once we just say span alone like this, it will select all of them on the page. But this is not what I want. I don't want to select all of them on the page. I only want to select the span that is inside P. And that P is inside the div. That means somewhere, if you have this p and span like this and they are not inside div, it will not work too. So if I just say span inside p only, so inside p only like this, so save, you see that that one too will not work once we get to the page. And the reason it's working is because I have not saved the code. So let me save the code. As you can see now, it's not working for that one too. The only one it will work for is when that span is inside p, and p also is inside div. Not just that the span must be inside p, it must be like this, not like this, and not like this. So that's what that selector is there for. You can use it to select one element that is inside another one, and if it can find it, it will style it. If it cannot find it, then nothing will happen to any other element on the screen. And that's what this question is asking you, to select h1 that is inside form. But it can go more than one element inside another one. It can be 3, 4, 5, depending on the way you structure your element on the page. Again too, this is another question here which is asking us to select all the p inside class job. So as you can see, the one that is inside is p, while the parent is job, which is this class job. And you know how to select class already, so which means the parent selector is job like this, while the child selector is p. And that's why I told you that this thing will be selector, not the element alone. You can use different selector to target the parent. So based on this question here, is just using the element selector to target the parent, but here now is using the class selector to target the parent. So anywhere we can find p that is inside this class job, as you can see, we are looking for any p that we can find inside element with the class job. So if you find it on the page, apply whatever you want to do here. But if it's not on the page, then don't do anything with the element. So that's how this thing works. Please, selector is very, very important there, because that's what you'll be using to target your element on the page. Again, this one now you should be able to do it. This one now you should be able to do it. This one you should be able to do it. I want you to solve this one. So what do I need to do here for this one? So what do I need to do for the question on line 132? So you'll be the one that will solve this. So what do I need to type for this one? Line 132. I'm waiting for your response. Hello? Hello? I'm still waiting. Your mic is muted if you are speaking. Hello? I can hear you. Your mic is still muted. Hello? Please. Hello?
Okay. 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 I've unmuted.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I want the solution.
Can you hear me now? I've been
Yes, I can hear you now.
unmuted. Hello.
I can hear you now. I guess it's the network. I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Hello.
Shit.
Okay.
What's wrong with
So now this one will be dot.
I'm coming. Please look at it very well. You need to know what is parent.
Okay.
You need to know what is child. Or what you are solving is on line 132. What you are solving is on line 132. So you need to know what is parent.
132.
Yeah, you need to know what is child. So the parent will come first, and the child is going to be the second.
Select all the class inside the.
So what
the parent is div. So the class
So what is the selector there for the parent?
child is class home.
Yeah, what's the
So
selector for the parents? So div.
Selector for the parent will be div.
Yes.
And then for the child will be dot home.
Yeah, so that's it. That's the solution there. So what about the next one? What about the next one? What about the next one? What's wrong with Google Meet? All right, so what about the one on line 135? The one on line 135. So what's going to be the selector for that?
You can go select all the div inside form. So form is the parent, while
Yes.
div
Yes.
is the child.
So what's the selector for the
So now
parents?
so now so it will be
So
so
what's
this
this?
will be form,
Yes.
sir,
Yeah, I can hear you.
form, form div, and
Yeah. So what about the
then
last one?
curly bracket.
Yeah, what about the last one?
Then select all the form inside div. So div is the parent, while form is the child. So it will be div form.
Yes. Yeah. So that's just it about the child selector. But don't forget, it's not just between two elements. It can be between
Okay.
multiple elements sometime, just like what I described at the top. So for this one now, you should be able to translate it. So we have a form, I have H1, I have span. So what this one is saying is that we want to select span that is inside H1. And at the same time, that H1 is inside a form. So the
Form.
same in we can have the div, we have H1, and we have span. Both of them are not doing the same thing. So this one is only looking for span that is inside H1, and that H1 is inside form. Why this second one is looking for the
Right.
span that is inside H1, but that H1 is inside div. So they are not selecting the same element based on the selector we have right now. They are never going to select the same element because form and the div are not the same. So this one will only focus on the span that is inside H1 and that H1 is inside form. While this one will focus on the span that is inside H1 but that H1 is now inside div. So this is how this thing works, and we're going to be using it a lot later on there when we are working on a real design. But before we can start working on a real design, we need to have knowledge about CSS properties, because these are the things that you are going to be changing on your element. So what are the properties that you have on different elements that you're going to be having on a page, and how do you change their value, or what are the property you need to call for a particular element? But I group them here based on what you are going to be doing later on, like starting from the basic, which is the text property. Again, we have the background properties that you can change on your element. We have the box property, which allows you to change some part of the stuff on your element. We have this position. I'm going to move position down because it's not something that we actually need right now before we start doing something. So it can come in later on. So I'm going to move it down and bring in all the one that we need first before we start dealing with positioning. So this position is kind of like advanced for now, because it's when you want to start placing something in a custom location on the page. That's where this positioning will comes in. But before we get positioning there, we should be able to do some stuff before we start diving into the positioning. But again too, some of these property here, you can change their value, but the way you change the value or the type of the value you are going to be using is depending on the type of the property you are trying to change. Some of them, they are based on length, which means you need to specify a unit for some of the value. But some of them, you don't need to specify anything. You just need to mention the value that you want to change. For example, here now, like that background now, but I will just use it for now. I can just say the background is going to be red. So the property here is the background, while the value of that property is this red here. So we are changing the property, the background property on this H1 from whatever that they used to be there before, into this new value, which is this red. And as you can see, the value I'm typing here is just a normal text as a value. But not every time that all the value you want to type, you just type them like this. Some of them, you have to provide a unit for the value because they are number. And you don't just specify the number like that. You need to specify the unit that you are using for that number. And that's the reason why we need to know about CSS units, because we have some of these common units that you can use here later on. And the units, I'm grouping it into two. We have the absolute unit and we have the relative unit. So when you're talking about the absolute unit, what this means is that whatever value you put beside them, they don't really change. So when you say 2px, is always going to be 2px, no matter what is going on the screen. So whether your screen change or your screen is not changing, is always going to be the same thing. Because if you look at what just happened now, you see that when I expand my screen, as you can see, the background get to the edge of the screen. And if I reduce this stuff, as you can see, the background or this width of the element, can you see that it's expanding and it's reducing based on what is going on with the screen. So we have some units that change based on what is going on the screen. And those are the units that we call relative units. So once something changes on the screen, they are going to recalculate their value. But with pixels, it doesn't change at all. Once I say that this thing is 200, no matter what is going on the screen, it's always going to maintain that 200. Let me show it to you. Yeah. So here, I'm just going to use this 100 pixels like this. So save. Can you see what is going on now? As you can see, the width of this box has been reduced. So no matter what is going on now, it will never change. So whether I reduce my browser or I don't reduce my browser, or I increase my font on the system or I did not increase my font, as you can see that it's not changing. As I'm changing the browser width, it's not changing at all. But if I use this thing now, if I change that 100 pixels, what is there before is 100 pixels. But now if I change the pixels to percentage now, you see that, can you see the way it's now behaving? It's different. So the number is not the major thing. The unit is very important. So you see the same 100 I'm using, but the way it's behaving now is quite different. When I was using 100 pixels, it's not changing like this. But now that I'm using percentage as a unit, it's now changing based on what is going on the screen. So when your value is changing based on whatever it's going on the screen, we call those type of units or the measurement there as a relative. So they are depending on what is going on the screen. And each one of them have what they are depending on, which I'm going to explain, because that's what the class is all about. But when you talk about absolute, once you use pixels, whatever value you use with pixels, that's the final value. It doesn't change and it doesn't depend on whatever that is going on the screen. As you can see here, changing pixel or percentage that is here to px here, we make sure that whatever length that we measure here is always going to stay at that value. So whether you change your screen or you don't change your screen, as you can see, it's maintained that 100 px. 100 px, because that's how the screen have been measured. Every screen that you have, they are measured in pixels. So you are now saying out of the pixels that you have from that your system or the browser, that white area, you are only occupying 100 pixels there. So from this white area here to this white area, there is a pixels for that. So out of that pixels, we are only taking 100. So and that 100 is what you are going to maintain. No matter what is going on the page, maintain that value that you put there. But most of the time, you want your element to adapt to the screen. So or to adapt to the font that the user is using, or to adapt to the screen or this entire white area box here. That's where relative unit comes in. So with relative unit, you can use your value, but that value can change later on based on whatever the type of the relative unit you are using. And each one of them here have what they are depending on the page when you use them. So starting from this rem, which is what I loved to use first, there like that. So the rem is different from pixels and is different from percentage. So if I save it now, can you see? It's still the same 100 that I'm using, but look at it. The stuff is now getting wider than the way it's supposed to be. Why is that thing changing to this? It's because of what this rem is depending on. And what is it depending on? So anytime you have rem and you have a number beside it, What that thing means is that you need to multiply this number by the font size of the HTML. So what that thing means is that whatever font size that we have on the HTML, that's what you are going to multiply by the value you have beside rem. And by default, every browser, if you don't change it, even on your phone, if you don't change it, they are using a font size of 16 pixels. So this is what is there by default if you don't change your font size. If you change it, then it will calculate it based on that value. But on your system or your phone, anytime you don't change your font size on your phone, it always defaults to this 16. And that's what rem is going to pick up to multiply by this 100. And that's the reason why you see that this thing is getting wider anyhow like this. The reason why it's wide like that is because 100 is being multiplied by this 16 here. And you know, if you multiply this thing by 100, you know it's going to give us 1600 or layer like that. So that's why we are having this value here, as you can see. So it's going to give us 1600 pixels, but that's not what I want. Let me just use a small number. So for example, like 2 here. So what this thing will do is that it will multiply 2 by the font size of the HTML. And I told you by default, font size of the HTML is 16. So anywhere you see rem, just multiply the value beside it by the font size of the HTML. But if you don't know the font size of the HTML, it's always 16 by default, and you can get it in the browser. Whatever the font size that the browser is using by default, you can get it in the browser. But how do you get what the browser is doing behind the scene? That's where something known as developer tools comes in. Because now when you want to be dealing with CSS and JavaScript a lot later on, you need to know what the browser is doing behind the scene. And in order for you to see what the browser is doing behind the scene, you can use the tooling that the browser is giving to us as a developer there to use to see what is going on behind the scene. And the tooling here is inside the browser. You don't need to install anything. It's always on every browser. And the tool is known as a developer tools. But how do you have access to it? To have access to it, just go to your menu from these 3 dots, depending on the browser you're using. But if you're using Chrome, Edge, or any Chromium browser, you always see these 3 dots at the top. It's just for you to click on it. And once you click on it, you go to this More Tools. So under the More Tools, you are going to see down here, Developer Tools. So this Developer Tools is where you can see whatever the browser is applying behind the scene later on. Because as a developer, you need to know what the browser is doing. In case something is not coming out the way it's supposed to come out on the page, you need to come to the developer tools to see what the browser is actually using there. And once you click on this, you see that it's going to open it up like this. My own is open up by the side, but your own is going to open up at the bottom side. You can actually change it to appear like my own too. But by default, it doesn't show like this to the side. The way you are going to see it at your side is going to be something like this. So this eye is going to come outside at your side there like that. So let me open it again. So click on this, then scroll down to More Tools, and you click on this Developer Tools. And once it is, it's going to open up in this way. It's always on every browser. So let me open it again on another browser. So this is another browser here that I can just paste this content as you can see here. So to open it up, as you can see, the setting of this one is different. So for this one now, as you can see, their own button is different, but once you click on it, you see the same menu that you are going to see there. So once you scroll down, you see More Tools, and under the More Tools there, just look for the Developer Tools. It's always the same text that they are using. All browsers use the same text for it. So go to More Tools, Developer Tools. But instead of you doing this thing every time like this, as you can see, there is a shortcut, which is you pressing Ctrl-Shift-I, which is something I'll always be using as from this moment on. I won't be going there because this is too long. Clicking on this button, coming down here to look for More Tools, and now click on this. This is too long. I can just hold down the Ctrl and the Shift on my keyboard, then follow by I, and it's going to open it up. And as you can see here too, it's opening up by the side because I've already set up all my browser to always open them up by the side. But by default, it's always at the bottom. So this is how it used to be by default, but you can change it. As you can see, it's just by going to the setting there like that, and you update where you want this thing to show like that. So here, just click on the side, because I always love it to be by the side so that I can see my page and see the what is going on the page. And as you can see here, this one is different the way it's displaying. It have this element, it have console, which is what we are going to be using later on when we get to JavaScript. But what we need right now is the element, because that's where we are going to see all our HTML code and along with the CSS code that you are applying on a particular element. So if you click on any element here, as you can see, it will show you all the CSS that the browser is applying on that element. So there is a user agent. These are the default styling that the browser is applying, and that's why you see that your H1 is always big. Can you see the browser is applying some CSS element on that H1 by default? But look at the top, you see that this is our own CSS that we apply. But if you look at it again too, you see that it's crossing over this one, while here is not crossing over the stuff. So why is it happening like this? As you can see, it's telling you that it's not using the background of red, it's using background of green. So with this, you can see whatever the browser is doing behind the scene. What is it using? What is not using? Or what is valid to the browser? What is not valid to the browser? Is going to show you everything under the dev tools. And here too is what you can see the final value that the browser is using for anything like rem, em, and some other units that you are going to be seeing later on there like that. But I will close this one, go back to the one I'm using, and as you can see, this one too is because of the browser I'm using, so I've changed it to always show by the side. But if I move it here, as you can see that it have the same thing. It have element, it have console, and so forth like that. But I don't use to arrange it like this. I always love to put it by the side. But once it's by the side from my own this in here, the browser, it's using their icon, is not using, but I know that it's still the same. If you go there, if I highlight any one of them, it's going to tell you what each one of them is representing. As you can see, this is the element. So if I click on it, it will show us the same thing where we have the HTML code and we have the CSS code down here. And this thing can be minimized if you don't need it, but I only want to show some stuff here. You can just drag it down. If you don't want to focus on the CSS part, you want to focus more on the HTML part. Maybe you are focusing on the HTML at that time. And if it is CSS 1 too, as you can see, you can drag it up or down so that you can see a lot of things. But I'm going to move them half so that we can see both of them. So whatever element you select here is going to show you the CSS. As you can see, it's the same thing, just like that browser that I just closed. So this element is having a style coming from, as you can see, is using inline style. But here now, this is the other selector that we have. And as you can see, it's telling us that this thing is coming from line 145. This thing is very important because it tells you where it's picking the CSS from, so that in case you want to change something later on, you just go to that line. So it's coming from style.css and on line 145. So if I want to update this thing now, it's just for me to come back here, then go to line 145 there like that. But once I save this in, then everything will go back to the normal, the way it's supposed to. As you can see, after saving it, it has updated the stuff to the correct line 148. And if you go back to the code, you see that it's picking the stuff from line 148. So this is the selector here. It's coming from line 148 because when something goes wrong later on, or you need to update something based on where it's picking the CSS from, you just need to look at the file, then look at the line number. After the colon, that's the line number where this code is coming from. So if you go back to your CSS, you see that the line is matching there, which is 148. So it's picking this style for this H1, for this particular one, for that line. And the only thing it's picking is just the width. It's not picking the background. As you can see that it draw line on top of the background. It's telling you that it's not using that. The background is using is the one here, which is the one that is coming from inline. So this is how the inline CSS is going to be. This is the selector for the inline that the browser will display. So whatever inline CSS you are doing, it will be element.style like this. But if it's every other selector that you know, it's going to list them out and it will tell you where it's coming from, the line, where it's coming from, or the file where the stuff is coming from. Because this thing is very important so that you will be able to see whatever the browser is doing behind the scene. What is it using? What is not using? Because if you look at it now, the H1 of this one is not using background of red. It's using background of green. But the other one, they are using background of red. Why? So you can see the reason why it's not using red for this one. It's because it's not picking this, it's picking the one that is coming from inline. But why all those one will be coming in later on? What I just want to talk about here is that you have the dev tools, which is the developer tools that you can use to see whatever the browser is doing behind the scene. And based on that, you can take a decision to change something or to do whatever you want to do based on what the browser is doing here. And this is live. As you can see, anytime you move to any of the element, it will show you whatever that element is on the page. So, and if you click on the element, it will bring out the style that the CSS is applying on it. So you're clicking on the H1, as you can see, it's only showing the style for that element. If I click on the body, as you can see, it will only show the style. As you can see, there is a margin and the display is blocked like that. There is no inline CSS on it. As you can see, the inline one is empty like that. So clicking on this P2, as you can see, inline style for this one too is empty, and this is the default style that the browser is applying on all your P by default. But you can change it later on. As you can see, user agent means what the browser is applying by default, and that's why you see that your P, they always have this extra space at the top and bottom, because the browser is applying all this margin start and margin end like that. But what is margin? When we get to that the box property, you are going to know what is margin, what is padding, and so forth like that. But for now, I'm focusing on the CSS unit. And one of the units that we are talking about right now is the rem. We've already talked about the pixels, which I told you that is the absolute unit. It doesn't change. When you use pixels, when you say 20 pixels, 20 is what is always going to use on the page. So whether your browser change or it doesn't change, it will always maintain that value. But when you're using rem or you're using percentage, this is what we call percentage here. This percent sign, where is it? Let me scroll up again. So this is what we call the percentage. This is the rem. This is the viewport width, and this is the viewport height. I'm going to explain each one of them. But let me put a stuff beside it so that you know what I'm talking about. So let me scroll up to that part. Where are you? Okay, this is it here. Under it we have relative units, relative units. So this one is known as a percent. So that's the name of, so this one is relative to the font size. So this one is known as a relative to the HTML font size like this. Is always calculate its value based on the font size. What is that percentage? I will get into it. This is what we call the viewport width. So this one is based on the width of this entire white area. Why this is known as the viewport height. So this one is based on the entire height of this white area. So when you want your calculation, the percentage will be based on this width from this side to this side. That's VW. This is VH, but I will explain them better once I get there. But for now, I'm only focusing on the rem. And what I told you about rem is that whatever value you have beside it will always be multiplied by the font size of the HTML. And by default, the font size of the HTML is 16 pixels. So whether I specify it here or I don't specify it, it's always 16 pixels by default. But how do I know that it is 16 pixels? So if you click on the, don't forget, anytime you click on any one of the elements, it will show you whatever CSS property that the browser is applying. But it's not showing everything here. It's not showing the final value. So in order for you to see everything, you can click on this computed. Under this computed, that's where you are going to see all the property. As you can see, so once you click on this show all, it will show you everything that the browser is applying on that element, or all the properties that you can change on that element. You can change the accent color, you can align, you can change the aspect ratio. As you can see, you can set background color, you can set background image, background origin, and it, can you see there's a lot of property, but some of them they have default value. As you can see, the border, whatever stuff, so it have the default value that the browser is using for some of them like that. So, and as you can see, these are different properties you can change on that element. So the same way I click on this H1 to see the property, I can click on this HTML2 to see whatever the browser is doing on it by default there. And if you scroll down to the section that we have the font, because this thing is in alphabetical order, it's arranged from A to Z, all the properties name from A to Z. So if you scroll down to the section that we have F and we have the font size there, you see whatever, can you see? So the font size of the HTML is 16 pixels. So whether you set it or you don't set the stuff to 16, is always going to be 16 by default. So if you set it, it will use the value you are setting, but if you don't set it, it will pick the font of the browser that you have there. But you can actually change it too based on your browser setting. But if the browser is normal font that is using there, it's always 16 by default. And this is the font that the rem we always use, or this is the value that the rem we always use to multiply or to get its final value. Don't forget, all these things we always get converted to pixels back behind the scene. As you can see, all the value, they are always pixels, pixels, pixels for all this. Most of this value here are like that. But the major thing here is that you can apply a value, but that value can be number. And some of these values that are number, you need to give them units. You don't just specify the number alone. If you specify the number and you don't put the unit, nothing will happen. So you need to use the unit, but not all of them that you have to put the unit, but almost all of them you have to put the unit. But under the unit, we have the absolute, which is this pixels. We have centimeter, we have inches, and so forth like that. But we don't use all those ones like that. The one you always see most is pixels, because that's how the screen are being measured. But you can actually use other units like inches, centimeter, millimeter, and so forth like that. All of them belong to this side, but they will still always get converted to these pixels here, because that's how the browser, or that's how the screen has been measured. So that's why you always see pixels being used. But sometimes before you get the value to pixels, you want this value to be calculated based on what is going on the screen, and that's where the relative unit comes in. And these are the common one. This is not all. These are the common one that you always use. One of them is this rem, which is relative to the HTML font size. So whatever value you put beside it, it will always be multiplied by the font size of the HTML. And I have an extension installed. As you can see, it's giving me the final value here. This is an extension. It's not in VS Code by default. So here, if I use 21 now, as you can see, this is the final value that is going to use. Why? Because this 21 will be multiplied by the font size of the HTML. And by default, it's only 16. So it will be 21 times 16. And 21 times 16 will always give you 336 that we have here. And once you get to the screen, you see that the width has changed. As you can see, the width has changed. But here now, once the font size of HTML change to another value later on, you see that it will recalculate the value. For example, here now, instead of using 16 here, I can just use 20 pixels. Can you see that it changed? So because that unit, that EM, is depending on the font size you have here. And once that font size change, it will update whatever value or wherever you are using rem. So if I use 32 pixels, can you see? I did not change that 21. That 21 is still there. But because that rem is depending on the font size of HTML, and once the font size change, it will recalculate the new value. That's why they are relative. Once whatever they are depending on change, they will recalculate their new value. So instead of this one now to be this 336, the new value will now be 21 times whatever I'm now using as the font size of HTML. So it will be 21 times 22, this 32. And what is the final value? So you can click on this element, go to the, because if you come here, it will not really show you what is going on there. So if I go to the H1, so let me select one of the H1, it will be showing you that it's using 21 rem, but this is not the final value. For you to see the final value, you can go to this computed here. So the CSS will have, or the browser will have computed everything, and you see the final value is using. And if you go to the width, can you see the width is down 672. Why is this 672? Is because the font size of HTML is now 32. And since the font size of HTML is now 32, it will multiply by 21. But if you return it back to any other value, or for example here now, I just put it to 10 pixels. Can you see that everything changed? Because the rem, most of the value here, they are depending on this font size. And if I go back to the H1, go to the computed, you see that it's now 210. So it's changing based on what is depending on. So if whatever is depending on change, it will recalculate the value, and you can get the final value whatever the browser is using under this computed here like this, because you need to know what the browser is doing later on behind the scenes, so that you not be say why is this thing not working. So you need to come here, see what the browser is doing. If it's doing the correct stuff, everything is okay. But if it's not doing correct stuff, you might need to go and fix your code and do the necessary stuff. And what I mean by fixing code, you see here that the font size is not what I was expecting. Because if I go to computer now, I was expecting 16, but this thing is now showing 10 because it has been changed somewhere. So what I can do here is to go back into my code and make sure that the font size is always this particular value that I want. And once I save, go back to the screen, as you can see now, everything comes back to normal there. So once anywhere you see rem being used, what that thing means is that the number beside it, you always multiply by the font size of the HTML. That is what rem is there for there. And I don't want to do too much on this thing, because the other one, I want to focus on them in the next class there, because I have something I want to quickly do, and it's 1 p.m. already. So in the next class here, I will be explaining this other one, which is this where is it? So I'll be explaining this viewports. I'll be explaining this percentage. Then after that, we are going to talk about all this text property in the next class. So in the next class, we are going to talk about all this text property, and at the same time, we are going to talk about all this percentage and this viewports weights there. Oh, but for now, say if I can even skip them because they are not needed. So I will skip it until we get to this box, because this is where it's going to be useful when we are talking about this width, height, and some other value. The one I actually need right now is just this rem, and that's why I'm explaining first, because I always use rem a lot. But all these other one too can come in later on when you need them like that, or for example like this percentage. Or I can even skip this one for now until we get to the actual design, so that we can finish all this property. Then when we want to start doing the designing, it's just going to be easier at that moment, because I've already explained what is relative unit. The difference there is that I'll be adding all this one into the list. You know about the rem right now, which is used to give a value. But where are you going to be giving the value? Where you are going to be giving the value is like this font size that we have here. So this one allows you to change the size of your text. By default, you know that all your H1 are always bold, and they are kind of have a bigger size compared to the other text on the screen. But you can change that by using font size there. Let me explain that one. Let me explain all the simple one first before I call it a day. So, and I will continue from there. So the color, nothing much about this there, but I need to explain what is color here. I forgot. Let me write this thing down. Guess that's the reason why I'm skipping this stuff. So let me put it down, because it's very important that I explain color representation. So we have a color representation. Whether you are dealing with background or you are dealing with normal color, we have different way of representing the color there like that. So we have the color name. So we have the named color like that. So which is what I've been using since. For example, you be saying red, you said blue, you mentioned green, and so forth like that. These are what we call colored named color. But that's not the only way you can represent color. We have another way, which is known as this RGB function. So you can represent a color by mixing red, green, and blue together. And CSS give us a function that we can use to do that. So we are going to be supplying something here. Again, you are going to be supplying another something here. And here we are going to be supplying another thing here. But what are you going to be supplying there? What you are going to be supplying, so this is the value of XX or YY. There is going to be, so the value of your XX and the value of YY is going to be a number between 0 to 255 like that. So this is a way of specifying a color. You can mention color name. We'll talk about them. I'm just putting them out now. So when you want to represent color, you can do it in this way by just mentioning the color of the name. But that's not how we are going to be doing later on. There are some colors that there's no name for them, but you can mix these three colors together, which is this red, green, and blue. And the value of this xx, yy, and zz is just a number between 0 to 255, which denotes how you are mixing the colors together. So xx here is going to be a number between 0 to 255, yy2 is going to be a number between 0 and 255, and z2 is going to be a number between that. So that's another way of representing color. Another way here is by using hexadecimal code like this. And when you're talking about the hexadecimal code, that one, it follows this pattern where you are going to have the hash. This thing has changed my keyboard. Let me return it back to you. So you are going to start with hash, then followed by xx, yy, zz. This is another way of doing it. Or it can be in this way where you have x, y, z, because you can actually give 2 value or 3 values. Again, br. Again, it can be like this. It can be x, x, y, z, or it can, let me use it like this. Let me just use something like this. So it can be something like this: x, y, z. It can be 3 number. It can be 3 letter like that. It can be 4 letter like this, or it can be 6 letter like this, or it can be 8 letter. But what are you going to be putting there? That's where the x comes in there. So hexadecimal is just another way of representing numbering system. I'm going to bring it out soon. X, X, Z, A, B, C, X. So it can be 8, but I don't use this 8 because this is where you'll be applying color this in. But I don't use that 8 much like that. But we're going to be talking about it now. So what is the value of the hexadecimal? Hexadecimal is just your x is just a number between 0 to 9, then A to F. This is hexadecimal number. And this stuff here is what you are going to be mixing together 3 times or 4 times or 6 times or 8 times to create the color that you want to use it. There's still another one that we have there, all the same. I will be starting with this color representation in the next class. I won't be starting with that unit again. And once we get to the other property that needs other units, I will talk about them. Because I don't want to be wasting time. We want to do the basic stuff first so that we start doing something. Then from there, we keep progressing that part. So from here too, we have the HSL mode. So this is another mode that you can use, HSL. So this one, you are going to have the hue, then you have the saturation percentage, and you have the lightness percentage. This is another method. So we have different methods of representing color, and I'm going to explain them, and I'm going to be seeing them later on too. So for the hue is just a number between 0 to 360. So it's just a color that has been, or a number that has been mapped to a particular color. So when you say red, that's a particular number that is mapped to that. When you say yellow, that's a particular number that is mapped to that. So you now, you will be bringing the code or the number for that color, and at the same time we now have the saturation percentage, which is not, so when you're talking about percentage now, it's just 0% to 100%. So when you say 0%, it means there is no saturation at all. And when you say 0% for this one, that means there is no light, which means everything will be black. And when you said everything is 100% for lightness, it means everything is white. Because when lightness is 100%, that's white. You can see like there's a lot of light. So what you'll be seeing is just white. And when the lightness is 0%, it means there is no light at all. So what you see is dark. But all this in, we are going to see it in action in the next class. So these are the common way of representing color. So we have the name one, which is what I've been using since there. So going back to the CSS, as you can see, this is the named color. So just mention the name of the color and it's going to apply the stuff. And CSS have this VS Code come with a lot of color that you can use there, but I don't use them, or I won't be even using them, because the design you'll be working with, most of them, they are using custom colors. So you have to mix other colors together to get those colors there. So as you can see, this is the color that I'm using around, which is a Rebecca purple, or it can be normal purple like this, and it's still going to come outside. Again, VS Code have color picker, and once I click on this, as you can see, you can represent your color in another mode. Just because the name is purple here, this is the color, this is how to represent it when you're using this RGB that I talked about here. Again, the hexadecimal mode is here too. VS Code have all this in. I just need to explain to you what each one of them means there. But they are easy to create. As you can see, it has changed the mode to another version. But what is all this in? That's why I need to explain it. Again, as you can see, we have the HSL mode like that. And we have this that HW, but we won't be using that one. These are the common one. RGB, the hexadecimal, the HSL, and the name of the color in case the color is having name attached to it. Now I'll be explaining it better in the next class by starting with this RGB, how to use it again, and talking about the hexadecimal, then talked about the HSL, then from there talked about all these text properties like that. And the following classes we are going to enter background because it's very important, then box, display, then after this property we start building something. So after we get to the display property and we are done with it, that's where we start working or start with the basic design there. And we have a lot of design here, or I have a lot of design here already that you are going to be working on as an assignment and a class work. Or the one I will do one, then give you something that is related to that, and you work on it. So we have a lot of them here that you are going to be working on, but it's using what we've not know about yet. Those are the properties that we need to talk about. So how do you change background of something and so forth like that? We need to talk about the background property. As you can see here now, can you see that this one is having this background color? The background color here is not the same thing as the background color here. Again, on the bottom, you can see that background color like that. The same thing here. So you always see background, and apart from that, you see that the element are placed side by side, or some of them are placed on top of each other. That's where this display comes in. So once we finish the display, we'll be able to do some of the design that's here. But we're going to start with the basic one, the basic design. Then from there we keep progressing to intermediate and advanced design. And after that, we see that we are doing a lot of work. From there, we now introduce a framework that simplifies the process. But before we dive into framework, that one will require JavaScript there. So, but first, we need to do some design before we now move to JavaScript later on. So that will be all for today's class. The next class will continue from there. Thank you.